When they came to get the once indispensable spy Isaiah Oggins, it wasn't any different from the many other people who'd been disappeared by the Soviet government. There wasn't any warning. One day, he just didn't return home. Oggins' family would never see him again, and it would be years until they discovered he died as part of a depraved experiment. One day in May 1947, Oggins was taken to Laboratory 1, otherwise known as Camera, or the cell in English. "You were sick," government doctors told Oggins, offering him an unmarked, unidentifiable pill. Oggins knew he would never survive the Soviet secret police, but perhaps if he cooperated, a pill was surely better than a gunshot to the back of the head. Oggins consumed the bitter pill, which was the poison often used on poison darts called curare. Within seconds, he was paralyzed. Conscious, but paralyzed. He was locked in, lying on the laboratory bed, completely helpless and immobilized. He could hear, see, and smell everything around him. Most frighteningly of all, he could feel everything the doctors might do to him. And then there was darkness. The experiment had been a success. The Soviet doctors were pleased with the efficiency of the poison, and their dear leader, one Joseph Stalin, soon got word that his once brilliant spy was no longer of any concern. That was the cell, the secret research laboratory of the Soviet secret police, and those who went in didn't come out. The patients were nothing more than lab rats. In Stalin's mind, these former loyal government officials, military leaders, and spies now served the greater good as guinea pigs for his secret medical experiments. Stalin and his comrades were obsessed with poisons. Those killer compounds could take people to the abyss, and when they had the right compound, death came fast, and the cause of death was difficult to ascertain. The perfect tool for clandestine murder, especially for killings in places people might ask a lot of questions, places like America. As you'll see, some remarkable people became victims of the cell. And while Laboratory 1, aka Poison Laboratory of the Soviet Secret Services, might not exist today, the Russian government has not relinquished its fondness of poisons. Make no mistake, the cell still exists, but under a more formal name, in line with modern values. But who was Isaiah Oggins, the man they paralyzed and killed in a matter of minutes? His story mirrors many other people's stories of the darkest days of the Soviet Union, in that one day he just went missing. His wife and child waited for him to come home, but the man was made a ghost on the orders of the perpetually paranoid Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin. Oggins' life story was quite unique since he was actually American, born in the state of Connecticut to Jewish immigrants. In his 20s, he worked as a researcher at Yale University, and it was around that time that he joined the Communist Party of America. And not long after, he'd begun working for Stalin's intelligence service. So why then would Stalin have him killed? The likely answer is that Oggins simply knew too much. He'd worked around the world spying for Stalin. The Soviets were soon fearful that Oggins might defect and go back to his native USA, so they disappeared him and sent him to the Gulag, where he was convicted of treason and espionage. His family protested to the American government, but their words fell on deaf ears. Stalin was too cautious, too unstable, to allow this man who knew too much to return home. Instead, Oggins received a lethal dose of the neurotoxin curare. The Soviets had been researching and working with poisons for a very long time. The first of the poison labs was introduced in 1921, but it was in the late 30s or 40s that the poison program would really flourish. That was the era of a Soviet biochemist named Gregory Myronovsky, a man who developed poisons and tested them out on hundreds, if not thousands of people. He took his orders from the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, an organization abbreviated as NKVD. The NKVD was, in simple terms, a kind of secret police, and under the ruthless Stalin, it grew in size. It was a dreaded organization that had eyes and ears on every street in Russia's major cities and across the Soviet Union. It made people disappear in the night, sometimes murdering people on the spot, sometimes shipping them off to the feared prison camps known as gulags, while others were sent to the good doctor's secret lab. Stalin's Great Purge would lead to the deaths of hundreds of thousands, and some of those people were political opponents and others so-called dissidents, and the cell had a prominent role to play, because getting rid of people quietly was often the job of a poisoner. Myronovsky's life's work was centered around ways of making people die quickly from exposure to poisonous substances. Any man that titles his PhD thesis "Biological Activity of the Products of Interaction of Mustard Gas with Human Skin Tissues" is truly someone to be feared. The inhumanity of his work earned him the nickname of Dr. Death, and he was proud of the fact that he didn't use animals to test his poisons on, but human subjects who came from the gulags. These were prisoners who had been declared enemies of the people and so were considered expendable. Myronovsky was tasked with developing poisons that were odorless and tasteless, poisons that couldn't be detected by their victims. They needed to be fast-acting and create a furious internal breakdown of organs so that the person who'd ingested the poison died quickly. Myronovsky's poisons of choice were mustard gas, ricin, digitoxin, curare, and cyanide. Not all of the people are built the same, so Myronovsky had prisoners sent from the gulags of all different shapes and sizes to test the varying effects of these deadly poisons. He tested his poisons on men and women of different ages, telling them that they were sick and needed to be treated with his medicine that would quickly put an end to their suffering. But his pièce de résistance was the development of the organic compound carbylamine choline chloride, a poison he named C2 or K2. When people were given a shot of this, their bodies would literally change as they wilted like dying trees. Witnesses stated that the victims became shorter, and within a few minutes a great calm seemed to settle on their faces. After 15 minutes, they were dead. These experiments were all approved by the secret police, with a former chief testifying in court. I gave orders to Myronovsky to conduct experiments on people sentenced to the highest measure of punishment, but it was not my idea. So whose idea was it then? Did these orders really come all the way from the top? The Stalinist era was pervasive with paranoia. Even the most loyal officials were never sure it wouldn't be them getting a knock on the door from the secret police in the dead of night. Fame was no safeguard either. The great Russian composer Dmitri Shostakovich was constantly at risk for writing music that might not fit with Stalin's ideal of nationalistic compositions. Every night, Shostakovich put a suitcase next to his apartment door, just waiting for what he thought was the inevitable. "Hello, Mr. Shostakovich, you're coming with us." But was Stalin himself ultimately a victim of poisoning? When he died in 1953, the autopsy stated he died of a stroke, but some researchers who have looked at his death have come to a different conclusion. They believe that when Stalin sat down to eat with one of his 4 comrades, his food was laced with warfarin, a blood thinner that is often used as a rat poison. Thanks to research done in the cell, it was well known that this tasteless and colorless anticoagulant could kill a person quickly and leave little trace. And who was present at this final dinner? Only the director of the secret poison lab and chief of the secret police, one Lavrenti Beria. Had he laced Stalin's food with rat poison? Some reports claim that when Stalin collapsed, Beria spat and cursed at him, but when Stalin suddenly gained consciousness, Beria got down on his knees and kissed his hand. Whether he had done the deed or not, a few months later he was executed with a bullet to the brain. Someone certainly had reason to want to put Beria away permanently. The cell was renamed Laboratory 12, and the work of researching and administering poison would go on for many years, with some even saying the cell is still open for business, but that's something we'll get around to soon. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, Soviet scientists experimented with more modern ways to get rid of a person in public and make the death look natural. They developed weapons that emit clouds of cyanide that could be sprayed into a person's face. The victim would drop to the floor and the death would look like a heart attack. In 1957, the assassin known as Bohdan Stashinsky used such a weapon to kill the Ukrainian political writer Lev Rebet. The autopsy ruled that he died of natural causes, but years later, after Stashinsky defected from the Soviet Union, he would testify that he'd used a modified gun to explode a hydrogen cyanide capsule into Rebet's face. He said his victim immediately fell against a rickety staircase and died shortly after. Stashinsky used the same device in '61 to kill the leader of the Ukrainian nationalists, Stepan Bandera. He was approached by Stashinsky on a street in Munich, and soon after getting a face full of toxic powder was lying on the floor dead. Fast forward a few years and the cell was focused on experimenting with a highly potent substance called ricin. This poison is made from the castor oil plant, and when it's purified, just a tiny amount, no bigger than a few grains of salt, can kill a person. Ricin is deadly if inhaled, injected, or ingested, and it can also get into the blood through cuts on the skin or can get into a person's system through the eyes. This poison has been around for years, but in the 1970s the KGB weaponized it. On August 8th in the year 1971, the Russian writer and outspoken critic of communism, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, was in a town in southern Russia in line for some food. A KGB agent walked up behind him and pricked him with a needle. The agent left the shop, went over to his boss, and confidently uttered the words, "It's all over, he won't live much longer." But it wasn't over, because not enough of the poison had entered Solzhenitsyn's body. At the time, he had no idea what had happened, but many years later he recalled experiencing a debilitating sickness in that period of his life and realized it was a failed hit, although he said he couldn't remember feeling a prick. What he certainly could remember was the fact that later that morning his shoulder started to hurt. Soon after, burn-like marks started appearing on his body, and when he woke up the next morning, much of his body was covered in painful blisters. He was bedridden for the next 3 months but survived. The outcome wasn't as good for a Bulgarian dissident and writer Grigory Markov. In 1971, he'd long since defected from communist Bulgaria and was living in London. On the 7th of September of that year, Markov had just crossed Waterloo Bridge in London and was waiting for a bus to take him to his job at the BBC. Suddenly, he felt a sharp prick in his side, and he wondered if he'd just been stung by an insect. He saw no insect, but he did see a man behind him picking up an umbrella from the floor. He thought nothing of it, but when he got to the BBC offices, that sting started to hurt a little more. He told his colleagues about the incident, still thinking he'd been stung by something like a wasp. Later that evening, he came down with a raging fever and was rushed to the hospital. But the doctors could do nothing to save Markov's life. He passed away 4 days later, and the cause of death was discovered to have been ricin poisoning. The forensic pathologist wrote that he found a pellet inside Markov's leg, no bigger than a pinhead. The outer casing of the pellet was made of 90% platinum and 10% iridium, and inside there were 2 extremely small cavities. It was in those cavities that he found traces of ricin. A KGB defector later confirmed the assassination and that ricin had been used. In 1991, the world watched as the Soviet Union fell. And did that mean an end to the cell and the end of the poisoning of people who Russian politicians might have deemed an enemy of the state? The evidence tells us no. And it appears the cell and its poison experts just evolved with the government. In 2004, Viktor Yushchenko was a candidate in the Ukraine presidential election. During that campaign, he suddenly became very sick and was diagnosed with acute pancreatitis. Other symptoms occurred, and it seemed as if the man was literally falling apart. His face became disfigured, bloated, and covered in ugly pockmarks. He had been poisoned, but with what, the doctors didn't immediately know. A British toxicologist said that a chemical pollutant called dioxin was to blame for the eruptions on Yushchenko's face. It was later discovered that the man had ingested 1,000 times more dioxin than is usually present in the body. He survived, but not without some scars. He also became president. It turned out that those growths on his face had saved him, because had they not appeared and alerted doctors that he had been poisoned, the dioxin might have damaged his vital organs. And the cell didn't stop there. In the 2000s, Russian journalists and human rights workers were poisoned with mercury. The KGB had long been closed down, but it had been replaced with the FSB, a security department that seems to be just as fond as using poison in assassinations. And even their former members aren't safe. In 2006, an ex-FSB agent named Alexander Litvinenko suddenly fell ill while living in London. Litvinenko had defected from Russia and had blamed many atrocities, including assassinations, on the Russian government. He also started working for Britain's secret services, which no doubt upset Vladimir Putin. Before Litvinenko became ill, he'd been drinking tea in a hotel not far from the US Embassy in London. The poison of choice in this case was polonium-210, a radioactive isotope that's deadly if ingested. The hotel where Litvinenko was drinking his tea was fitted with the latest CCTV technology, and the tapes revealed that along with Litvinenko, 2 other prominent Russians with ties to the government had checked in. Both these men were known to Litvinenko, and on the day of the deed, they were seen by security cameras walking around the hotel and going in and out of the bathrooms. An investigation would later reveal that massive amounts of radiation were found in the bathroom stalls. The traces of polonium these guys had left around the hotel were invisible to the eye, but not to the instruments that recorded levels of radiation. Polonium was found on the floor, on bottles of alcohol, on a chopping board, and even on an ice cream scoop. Of course, the 2 men also managed to get some into Litvinenko's teapot. Days after he drank the poisoned tea, he started to feel weak and suffered from severe diarrhea and vomiting. Soon he was unable to walk and was rushed to the hospital where his condition worsened. His hair fell out and he suffered irreversible nerve damage. But he hung on for weeks and talked to the media from his hospital bed. "I want the world to see what they did to me," Litvinenko said when he was talking to journalists. Litvinenko was unable to survive the poisoning, and after he died, the investigation into his death revealed that polonium-210 was to blame. The radioactive substance can be moved around in a vial of water. It can be taken through airports, and once it's inside the victim's body, it takes some time to kill him, as cells slowly but surely commit suicide. It's ideal for assassins, since this kind of slow death gives them enough time to get away. A nuclear scientist in the UK said using polonium-210 was both genius and stupid. Genius because it's so hard to detect, and stupid because anyone opening that vial probably would have been contaminated too. An expert on Russia said that the Russian government has made a point in killing Litvinenko slowly, and that the Kremlin was sending a message to its critics. Talk badly about Russia, and no matter who you are, where you are, we will find you and we will silence you in the most horrible way possible. Now you really have to go watch this show, What is the Deadliest Substance on Earth? Toxicity Comparison, or go watch this one instead.